I'm an Aboriginal person from New South Wales, 53 years old. I've got a number of university degrees and a lot of experience in working entirely for the cause of my community, the Aboriginal community. My dad was a Scot, probably still is, but I haven't seen him since I was 3 years old, so I don't really know much about my lineage back in Scotland, but as you can see from looking at me, I obviously am not just related to Aboriginal people. But I grasped the opportunity to speak to you today because, and to come along to the summit and talk because Aboriginal people, and I put myself in this category, have a deep-seated suspicion of the corporate world, because in our eyes it's really the corporate world that we have found the least susceptible to our pleas for assistance and help. Over the years that I've been active in Aboriginal affairs, we've managed to get to politicians, and we managed to convince a lot of citizens of the plight, of the need for help and assistance, but the sector of the Australian community that we seem to have the most resistance in terms of getting through to is the corporate world, the corporate sector, if I can term it that. But it's a strange irony, really, that that's the situation, because in 1967 the Australian people resoundingly passed a change to the Australian Constitution that required the federal government to take up the funding of and looking care of the Aboriginal portfolio. Up until that stage, what had happened was Aboriginal communities were completely deprived of their resource to maintain the culture that existed here for anything upward of 50,000 years. And so we found ourselves, our communities, in poverty, stuck on the edge of towns. Often we were moved because Australians have this very idiosyncratic view of Aboriginal people. My mother, for example, was born on a mission out of Wellington. A mission is an area that people were concentrated onto, Aboriginal people were concentrated onto, so sometimes I prefer to use the term concentration camp. The mission was set up basically there because the Aboriginal people, my ancestors, started to congregate around the edge of town and were looking for handouts and support from the new people who had arrived and basically stopped us from living on the land. So we had the misfortune there of being in the face of Australians. So this mission was actually created to take the ugly picture of the desperate, poverty-stricken Aboriginal community away so it couldn't be seen. So the Nganama community reserve that my mother was born on was taken, the people were moved from the edge of Wellington and put around the hill out of sight. And so I think a lot of Australians still have this problem of not being able to confront the really desperate situation that we have right here on our doorstep. It concerns me sometimes when I see how generous Australians can be when there's a tsunami or some problems overseas, and the federal government talks about how much it's. I see Costello just the other night spruiking on about how much foreign aid has increased. Well, right at this very moment, the amount of funds that are available for Aboriginal community is being reduced, not increased. And yet we still have the desperate situation that exists in Australia of third world, that you have a third world community living right on your doorstep. And it doesn't just exist in Alice Springs or the Northern Territory, it actually exists here in Redfern, in Sydney, out in the western part of Sydney. It exists all over Australia. So I've decided I need to be a bit brave and to venture out and to talk to people like yourself in the corporate world. and to try and build some bridges and get some communication going. I haven't told any of my colleagues that I'm here. And then when I look out the window, I see the only boat that's probably got an Aboriginal flag on it cruises by, and I go, I'm not going to get away with this. But my background is I went to law school at University of New South Wales, and I practiced for some time as a solicitor, and I was particularly keen to bring that knowledge, especially the knowledge about corporations and that, into play, because after that changed into Constitution in 1967, when the federal government took up funding Aboriginal communities to try and solve some of the desperate health, housing, welfare needs of the Aboriginal community, they decided, in their wisdom, not to give the money to individuals. So what they decided was that all Aboriginal people, all Aboriginal communities had to incorporate. So we really have two very distinct and different kinds of corporate worlds in existence in Australia. We have this social welfare dependent corporate world of the Aboriginal communities, because all of our programs have actually ended up being operated through corporations. We've all had to create corporations, whether they be land council, cooperatives, or councils that have been set up under federal government legislation called the Registrar of Aboriginal Corporations, or the Aboriginal Councils and Associations. So when Aboriginal people met the challenge of setting up corporations, we actually had the three bottom lines that I hear people talking about at this summit. The main reason that Aboriginal people were asking for funds for was to take care of social issues. Our people didn't really understand the economics and the financial bottom line, and unfortunately that's still a fundamental problem. But Aboriginal people in our corporate world are very aware of the need to be respectful of and concerned about the environment, and also to be concerned about the situation of our brothers and sisters, our uncles and aunties, and our community, our family. So our ventures into the corporate world, which was forced onto us, has always been with the aim of satisfying the three bottom lines. So I must say the one that we're least successful with is actually the financial bottom line. So it seems to me that maybe there is a possibility that we have something in terms of corporate governance and that we can share with the corporate world. I don't know, but this is the proposition I'm going to put to you today. So I'll just go through this. By the way, this is the first PowerPoint presentation I've ever done, so I hope it works. You can tell I'm a solicitor, like a lawyer, like the fellow that was on before. So as I've said, the reasons for the main factor that brought about the setting up of Aboriginal corporations, and there's probably throughout Australia, I'm just guessing, but there would probably be anywhere up of 5,000 or 6,000 Aboriginal corporations that have been set up. Basically every Aboriginal community in Australia has one at least Aboriginal corporation. Some communities, like say the one at Kempsey, at one stage I counted there were 27 Aboriginal corporations. We had one for the childcare, we had one for health, we had one for housing, we had a land council, etc. The story goes on. So the main thing that brought about this establishment of corporations in the Aboriginal community was the need to confront the poverty and the poor living conditions and so forth of the Aboriginal communities. And just before I go on to talk about this, when I started becoming involved in trying to do something for my community, it was actually back at the end of the 1960s, the early part of the 1970s, and I looked around me and I could see that that there was nobody had homes, nobody had employment, There was all sorts of alcoholism problems, all sorts of desperate substance abuse problems, domestic violence, all of those sort of poor social indicators. I'm presuming that a lot of people actually know this here, that this is the situation we have in Australia, where the Aboriginal community continues to suffer under those problems. So in preparation to do this talk, I went and got the information, statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Yeah, that's it. And the current ones that I was able to lay my hands on were the ones from 2004. So what I'm really trying to say to you in this quick talk is that the problems that I saw back in 1971-72 are still here. For all the funds and money that has been put into trying to solve the problem of Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities, we really haven't gone any further down the road. The retention rates of kids in school are still as bad as it was, and all of those other problems that I've talked about. And to just back up my my assertion, that I've provided you with some of these statistics. In the Northern Territory, the indigenous infant mortality rate is 3 to 4 times higher than the rest of the community. And here's now I could actually go through and spend 25-30 minutes on its own just going through a whole lot of statistics, and I haven't got that amount of time, so I'm just going to quickly let you read some of these rather than covering them. But basically what you're going to see is that all of the social indicators to do with health and well-being, economic well-being and so forth of Aboriginal people is a really drastic situation. I've actually had the misfortune of one of my own children attempting to commit suicide as well, so thought I was breaking out of some of these cycles, but I've discovered that no matter how well dressed I am, well educated I am, as long as I continue to be part of the community, I'm still confronted by some of these problems. So I'm just going to flick through all of these things, which I'm sure if people want to give themselves that information, they can. What I'd like to get to talking about is trying to come to terms with and solve some of the problems of our communities is we are having severe difficulties in actually operating these corporate entities, because it's not like the mainstream corporate sector where the members of the boards of directors and your CEOs are all university educated people who have a background in business and so forth. The people who are sitting on the boards of directors and so forth of Aboriginal community organisations are actually got no knowledge or expertise in this area at all. We're using corporations because that's been forced on us. That, together with the fact that currently the funding base for Aboriginal communities is shrinking, and while the problems aren't going away. So prior to its demise, one of the last things that ATSIC did was it created and put a team of experts together and created a program for training Aboriginal people to understand governance issues, how to run boards of directors, how to meet the responsibilities of CEOs and so forth. And so that's actually what I'm doing at the moment, which is, I guess, how come I'm here speaking to you. I've taken on a contract with an organisation called Tranby Aboriginal Cooperative College in Glebe, and I'm setting up one of these courses, a certificate 4. It's a workplace training and assessment. It's a workplace training program, basically, and the idea is that we're going to hopefully train members of the Aboriginal community to fulfil the various roles of being members of the board, and try and meet some of those things like develop ability to be able to manage funds and so forth better than what we have been in the past. So, yeah, I guess one of the problems that I found when I was brought on board to set up these Indigenous governance courses at Tranby College is that Tranby College receives about it's ended up with only about 60% of the funding that it's been getting from government departments, and we're having a struggle to maintain the teaching staff and to actually provide this training for Aboriginal people. One more minute. So I'm hoping that through making connections, if you've got people in the corporate sector that want to help and set up some sort of partnership with Aboriginal people, I've got a perfect case right here in Sydney where we can help, because we desperately need some funds to keep the teaching staff that we've already got on board in order to actually float some of these programs and keep the ones that are in existence going as well. So I've been given the 1 minute signal, so I'd like to just finish by reading something that I was inspired to write when I was getting ready to do this presentation. I call it Building a Bridge into the Future. Like a flash flood, a rapacious torrent of greed has ripped through the peace and tranquility of the Australian continent, sweeping all before it in a wave of destruction, leaving desolation in its wake, wreaking havoc on this land, our sacred mother. And so today there is a great urgency to build a bridge to our future, a bridge over the ravine that separates people from the hope that there will be a future for life on this planet. A bridge over the murky waters of environmental catastrophe, foaming with the pain and suffering of a people dispossessed. If we build this bridge, it will take us, I believe, to new horizons and a brand new day, and hopefully a new beginning. This bridge we will need to stand on pillars of respect for one another and for the Aboriginal people and for our mother. You and I, what we do and believe, how we behave and act towards the planet we live on, these are the building blocks of our bridge to tomorrow. For as each link in a great chain plays an essential part, each person is an integral part of this bridge that we need to build. On this bridge we can maybe one day proudly stand and renounce the greed that would have us rob the future generations of humanity of a place to live. Then we may live in harmony with the spirit of this great place. If we live as custodians rather than as pillagers, we will generate hope rather than fear and despair, and only then we may all live in a joyous harmony with the spirit of this great land of our mother. So I wish you all well in your endeavours to reshape the future from the bleak prospect that stares us in the face today. Thanks for letting me talk to you.
Thanks for that talk. With your Sydney College, are you looking for people to actually lend their expertise in terms of training, or are you more talking about partnerships in terms of funding?
Yeah, particularly in terms of funding. Look, I've got to really get my head around some of the changes that are happening at the moment. Somebody was telling me the other day that it's actually possible for corporations to get their staff to contribute through their paymaster to community organisations. Apparently it's not just charities, but individual workers can actually contribute. Now, if an organisation, say like AMP or some huge organisation, was to get its staff to give $2 each week, the people who give the $2 will get a tax break, and apparently there's a tax break against the payroll tax as well. So there's the government itself, the government in Australia is trying to get the corporate sector to pick up responsibility towards people like Aboriginal people. So the problem we've got at the moment is we've got some good staff at Tranby, but some of them are going to have to be sent on their way. Some of the programs that we wanted to put into place next year, we can't put them in. And in fact, the corporate governance program that I'm putting into place, we've had to stop the Aboriginal studies intake for next year so that we can fund that. So, yeah, I can't really say much more than that. I know it's money that we need. We actually need money to keep the dedicated teaching staff on board that we've got at the moment.
Can I say something? In the top end where I'm working, we've recently set up a women's cultural organisation.
We had a shortfall of $200,000 last year. The thing is that the college has it's one of the only colleges in Australia that has a national brief. We bring Aboriginal people from all over Australia to this college, and really, the government gives us X amount of dollars to cover the course, but it actually costs a lot more to educate an Aboriginal person or to train an Aboriginal person than others, because we have to bring them so far and accommodate them here. So what's ended up happening is they've brought in this change where they pay exit money. You get the balance of your grant for the number of students that succeed at the end. So if we have a retention rate of only, say, 60 or 70%, then the money that we spend on the other 30 or 40%, we just lose it. So we've ended up getting caught with the changes that have happened with the demise of ATSIC. We sort of understood the lay of the land till then, and with the changes that have happened in the last couple of years, we're starting to really struggle. And I suspect that I know actually that there's a whole range of Aboriginal organisations that are really seriously feeling the pinch. So I know that in our case, we're trying to overcome a shortfall of $200,000. The CEO of the college is actually here. He's downstairs at the moment, but some of you may have met a fellow named Paul Knight, who's here with me as well. So if anybody can make any suggestions on any directions that we might go in this area, please grab he or I over the next couple of days and help us out if you can. Yeah?
My name is Michelle Leonard. I work with the Indigenous program at World Vision Australia, and I'd just like to make a further contribution, if I may. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the communities who we're talking about, and Jennifer and Christopher. I'd just like to reaffirm everything that's been put up, and also specifically all the statistics around poverty and the issues that are facing Aboriginal communities around Australia. We have 3 main programs, one in Western Australia, one in the Northern Territory and one here in Redfern, and are facing the same things. But saying that, it's also very, very important, as Christopher would know himself, that the Aboriginal community is very robust and very strong and resilient, and there's no excuse for people who live in the city to not know about Aboriginal issues and how strong and robust the community is, because there are 2 Aboriginal newspapers that are produced continuously that are constantly telling us very positive stories about the Aboriginal community in this country. Just a contribution to make, we do a lot of work working with community and working with corporates, and I've just got 4 main points just to share with you if you are corporates considering working in this sector. One is timing. There are 2 issues with timing. Often communities might go to a corporate and talk to a corporate about assistance with funding. Those communities are active communities that are living day by day. Sometimes a corporate can take up to 8 months to actually get that money in the bank, and for that community that can be the end of it. So that's just one thing to think about in this area.
Can I just suggest that, because we are on time, and I really... and there was another question in front. So there was a question at the table in front. Yeah? Okay, are you quite happy with that? Okay, fine.
Just another one with timing was that often when we're working with corporates work at a very fast pace, and they want to get messages back to their staff and the board very quickly. In a lot of Aboriginal communities, activities take a long time, and so there's a difference with timing there. Another issue is the government funding. The government funding, we all hear all the time that all this money goes to the Aboriginal community and the Aboriginal sector. there is not a lot of money at the grassroots level, and we're in the same situation trying to get funding for different programs. One thing with government money is that it's tied to government criteria, which is often not flexible or innovative enough to deal with some of the programs that Aboriginal communities are trying to implement themselves. And as corporates, you can offer them an opportunity to implement innovative programs. Another issue is just listening to what Aboriginal people say. Often you're talking with people who live in very, very remote areas of Australia who don't speak English and conceptually think in a very different way than we do as non-Indigenous Australians. And so that listening is critical, and whereas a corporate might go in with goals around their social responsibility activities and they have particular criteria, there needs to be flexibility there as well, because you really need to meet the needs of what the people want themselves. Just finally, I think another one thing is that these communities are very different all around the country, and when I go to the different programs that we have around the country, it's often like going to Asia, to Europe or to Antarctica in some places. Communities are very different, and it's not a blanket across the country. So I think they were the most... just one other thing, something that we find that we can give back to corporates and that community give back, which Jennifer was just touching on then too, is educating staff and advocacy and really building up the staff in the company around issues that are happening in their own country. And you start to get a bit of a shift about what you think of Australia yourself, and you're also contributing to the responsibility we have as citizens together.
Okay, thanks.
Question? Yes, yes, please. I can't even find where I've written it now. Have you approached the TAFE at all? The TAFE system to get an alliance built up? I
teach in TAFE as well. I personally have an association with TAFE.
Have you had any positive feedback from them?
Well, just in regard to TAFE are doing a great job at providing training for Aboriginal people. The particular college that I'm working with, Tranby Aboriginal College, actually caters for tribal people from traditional areas and so forth from right around the country. The TAFE programs are a state-based program.
Right.
And the thing about Tranby Aboriginal College is it's a community organisation. It's not actually a government organisation. So it's like TAFE probably won't collapse, but unless we somehow manage to source some funds from somewhere, there's a very real problem for us. Like Tranby was set up in 1957 and it's managed to survive until now. So, TAFE could actually take us over and replace us, I suppose, if we collapse. But then there's people from some of the remote areas can't access TAFE, so they take advantage of our education. Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can I just ask a question, please? I'm actually getting the wrap up now, and you will be staying for coffee and other things, and I think part of it is the program. I'd actually, before I thank Christopher, I'd very much like to thank Jennifer, not just for her presentation and for the part when she didn't present to us, when she actually showed us the passion and commitment and the importance of this by communicating to us her true feelings and the impact on her as a person, and how we as people should also carry that understanding and that emotion. And the real thank you I would like to have for Jennifer is I was in Western Australia for a leadership and academic conference last Thursday, Friday, and it was fantastic. We had the traditional welcome and acknowledgement, and there was a comment from many of our international guests about what a tokenistic gesture this was, as there was nobody actually on the mainstream agenda talking about the issues of this very important community within our country. So I would like to thank Jennifer for elbowing Christopher onto the program. And I would particularly like to thank Christopher for backing up to the technology of a PowerPoint, which these days is crucial corporate gear, and to cross over into our divide and to reach out the hand to us, so that we have touched him and we have actually met him today, and that hopefully that bond of trust has formed, and that some of us can move from this general dissatisfaction that we felt when we walked across the bridge for reconciliation, or when we watched an inconvenient truth, when we thought, this is not so good, I will sit here. That's dissatisfaction. The last word is action. Please take some.